Brought into the public eye by Rush Limbaugh's controversial comments, attorney Sandra Fluke has become a prominent advocate for women's rights. She has devoted her career to fighting for social justice and minority rights. She joins us here tonight on this edition of ATV's Special Broadcast. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I want to start off
for having me.
By talking about how you became interested in some of the issues that you've been advocating for.
Sure. So I advocate for social justice broadly, which includes everything from women's rights and gender equality to immigration reform to workers' rights, civil rights, gay rights, lots of different rights. So I have a social justice agenda. And that really started for me in college. I found there, I think, what a lot of people find, which is a lens for understanding the types of injustice that we've seen in our lives up until that time, and language for expressing why it's wrong, and some of the tools that we need to organize our communities and start to speak out and fight back up against injustice. And so that's really what I began doing right after college and even while I was a student. And it's why I went to law school, ultimately, was to add yet another set of tools, legal tools, to be able to address injustice.
And you mentioned that while you were in college was when a lot of this started. So how did you begin to get involved as a college student in this process?
Well, for me, it started because of a problem we were having on our campus. The Cornell Women's Resource Center, there was an effort to defund the Resource Center, and that was my first action, standing up and speaking out. And from there, I realized this was something that I was passionate about, and this is how I wanted to spend my career and my time and my work. So I began organizing students on campus through a group we had called Students Acting for Gender Equality. We did work against international violence against women, against human trafficking, on pay equity, which is a concern that students face really 1 year out of college. We see a difference in pay for women. And when I left college, I went and worked on anti-domestic violence and anti-human trafficking and gay rights work.
And then later you went to Georgetown Law School and you recently graduated from there.
I did.
Do you think that being in Washington, D.C. and surrounded by so much political advocacy in any way affected your passion about the subject?
Well, it's part of why I came to Georgetown, and I imagine it's probably why a lot of students come to AU as well, is because we get a unique experience being in D.C. to be able to be part of these conversations and influence conversations about policies that impact students and young people. I was talking recently with Young Invincibles, which is a group that advocates for young people around the work that we need to do on student loan reform, on financial aid for students. And tonight I'm going to be talking to students here at AU about immigration reform. And that's currently very much in discussion in Congress. So students here, as well as at Georgetown and the rest of DC, really have an opportunity and therefore I think a bit of a responsibility to try to engage on some of these issues.
Now, some sources and in the media have described you as a radical feminist. Would you agree with that classification, or how do you react to something like that?
I would say they ain't seen nothing yet if they think I'm a radical feminist. There are some voices out there that are far more radical than I am. I firmly claim the feminist label. As for the radical part, I think they don't realize the full spectrum. I label myself as a social justice advocate because I see my feminism as standing up for a lot of different communities, and I don't think that what I'm advocating is so radical. I think that the types of changes that I'm pushing for are really based on American values of fairness, equality, everyone contributing their fair share and getting fair treatment in return. So I wouldn't say radical. Mm-hmm. Progressive, yes.
And you also described yourself in an article as a practical advocate.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about that and how you would say your approach is practical and how you go about advocating.
Well, I think because I'm a lawyer by training, that makes me a bit of a practical advocate, because I'm really looking at what are the concrete tools, the concrete legislation and regulations and court cases that we can use to address injustice. So there are some advocates who are really working on a theoretical level and thinking about just what is the pure, absolute, ideal type of equality that we could achieve and what's wrong with all of the ways in which we're not there. And I like to see that as a goal and a dream, but there are a lot of compromises and a lot of practical steps we can make along the way. And I believe in doing that practical work to try to get there slowly but surely. So that includes things like realizing when we have a moment to make progress on an issue and getting as far as we can in that moment. We certainly have seen some things over the last year where the public really took a look at an issue and seized on it, and that gives us an opportunity to make progress.
And you mentioned earlier that several of the groups that you advocate for are minority groups. Mm-hmm. So what's a way that they themselves can start from kind of the bottom up and get their voices heard?
Well, I think that there are a lot of organizers and voices coming from within these communities. We think about the immigrant community. The Dreamers have been doing amazing advocacy, really speaking up for themselves, and at considerable risk, because many of them obviously are undocumented and willing to speak out and say proudly that they're undocumented and that they should be treated differently. So there's a lot coming from within communities. And what I try to do is be an ally and say, I can't have their experience and I can't claim to have it, and so I have to hear them and honor their experience and follow their lead on how to address the concerns that they have. But I have to be there, being an ally, because that's really important, that we all stand together on all of these fights.
I want to talk about something that came into the media about a month ago with Rush Limbaugh.
Oh,
and
good.
He certainly made some controversial comments, and it caused a huge uproar in the public. But I want to know how you personally felt when you heard the things that he said.
Well, with Rush Limbaugh, you're going to have to tell me which comments. The ones about me?
Yes.
Okay. It was obviously hurtful to hear some of those comments. They were difficult on a personal level, but they're not necessarily anything we haven't heard before. There have been a lot of voices for a long time that have used this type of rhetoric to silence women, to silence other communities as well. We're certainly hearing that kind of racist rhetoric in the immigration reform debate right now. So what I thought was important about the situation is that we take that moment to have a national conversation about how damaging that type of rhetoric is, and to talk about what the policy was that we were really fighting for and what that could do for women's health, and not allow the hateful rhetoric to accomplish its purpose of sidetracking us and silencing us. And I was really proud that women and the men who care about them in this country successfully came together and really did push for that policy.
And then just earlier today, Hillary Clinton issued a statement saying that she is supporting gay marriage. So is this
Welcome to the fight, Madam Secretary.
And is this also a step in the right direction, and how will this help some of the issues you've been passionate about?
It's absolutely a fight in the right direction. She has, throughout her career, been a strong voice for LGBT equality. As she referenced in her statement, she spoke out saying gay rights are human rights are gay rights, similar to the statement she made about women's rights decades ago. So it absolutely makes sense that she's on the right side of history on this one. I've been passionate about marriage equality and have been doing my best to work on that. I think we're going to see some interesting progress from the Supreme Court in the next few months, so it'll be very interesting to see where that takes us. But the rapid pace of change on gay rights in this country and on marriage equality specifically is really inspiring, and it just shows that when we aren't afraid to come out of the closet, so to speak, and to talk about our progressive values and what's right, that a lot of people will stand with us and we will be able to make progress. But I want to make sure that folks understand that there's more to the LGBT community's fight than just marriage equality. Because even once we achieve that in every state, there's a lot of other battles left. We need to pass ENDA, which is the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. We need to address inequalities that persist in the military. So there's a lot to that fight beyond marriage equality as well.
Great. And would you say that there is one important issue that you think needs to be resolved right away? Anything that stands out to you?
You know, this is part of me being a practical advocate, is I try to focus on the one that I think that we can get past right now. So one for the LGBTQ community is that we're dealing with immigration reform. We need to make sure that same-sex couples are able to bring their partners on visas in the same way that married couples can. So that, I would say, is one of the important things we can handle right now.
Mm-hmm. And how would you go about making sure that that specific issue is addressed in Congress?
It's got to be included in immigration reform, but we also have to repeal DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. The Supreme Court is likely, I think, going to strike down one of the provisions as unconstitutional later this year, but we're still going to need Congress to repeal the entire thing. It's unfair. If it came before Congress today, they would never sign it. It's a vestige of past misunderstanding and discrimination that we need to wipe away.
And since you've been in the public space a lot recently, do you have any plans to run for a public office in the near future?
You know, I'm very interested in seeing a lot more young people thinking about it, especially young women, people from communities of color, LGBTQ folks, and I try not to be a hypocrite most of the time. So if that opportunity comes up, that's something that maybe I would think about at that point. We've still got a lot of progress to make on getting more communities represented. We had a record-breaking election this fall. There are now the highest number ever of women in the U.S. Senate, and for the first time, the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives is made up primarily of women, LGBTQ folks, people from communities of color. It's never happened before, but we've got a long way to go. For women, this record-breaking election took us from 80th in the world to 79th. In terms of the representation of women in a national legislature. So there's still a lot of progress to be made.
All right, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's a pleasure to meet you and talk to you.
Thank you.